The Satavahanas, after the Mauryan age, were ruling in the Deccan. This was the 1st century BCE to 220 CE. The merchants were Buddhists and they donated to the viharas or to the monasteries, but the rulers worshipped Vishnu and Shiva, and they patronized rock-cut architecture and cave temples. In the north, what happened was there were small states and they fought against each other so that there was an invasion from the north. And who invaded? The Indo-Greeks, Indo-Parthians, Kushanas, and Shakas. This was between 200 CE and 300 CE. Kanishka was the greatest Kushana ruler and he began the Shaka era. He ruled from Purushapura or Peshawar, which was the capital city. The Buddhist council that was held during this time at Kandalavana, Kashmir was very important because this is when Buddhism split into Mahayana and Hinayana. And he himself, Kanishka himself, was a Mahayana Buddhist. So he popularized idol worship of Buddha. And therefore, two schools of art, of sculptural art, came about, which were Gandhara school of sculptural art. This popularized Indian plus Greek plus Roman style. There was a mixture of everything. And Mathura school, which was pure Indian style of art. Jataka tales were during this time. Charaka and Sushruta were the ones who popularized medicine. And trade flourished because the Silk Route developed between China and the Mediterranean, and there were lots of coins found during this period. The Chandraguptas. Chandragupta I ruled between 320 CE and 335 CE. He was just a local chief of Magadha, and he rose up and he took over the throne. Magadha became prominent again, and he ruled from Patliputra. The zone that he covered was across Magadha, Saketa, and Prayag. Samudragupta was supposed to be the greatest Gupta ruler. He was a warrior, musician, and scholar. His military campaigns were from Himalayas to Kanchipuram, that's north to south, Bengal in the east to Delhi in the west. In the Allahabad pillars, there were Sanskrit inscriptions about him, and this was written by Harisena, who was in his court. He was a Hindu, but he tolerated Buddhists and Jains. He permitted the Sri Lankan ruler Meghavarman to build a Buddhist monastery at Bodh Gaya. Chandragupta Vikramaditya, also called Chandragupta II, reigned between 375 CE and 414 CE. He made Ujjain his second capital. He did an interesting thing by marrying off his daughter to the ruler of the Deccan area, which was Vakataka, and together they beat the Shakas of Gujarat, Malwa, and Saurashtra, and he took over two ports, which were Broch and Cambay. This way, they became very powerful. There were inscriptions about him at the Iron Pillar at Mehrauli in Delhi, in Udayagiri, Mathura, and Sanchi. Even Fasin, a Chinese scholar, wrote praises about him in his book. The Gupta age peaked in glory during his reign. He appointed 9 scholars in court called Navratna, or 9 gems. Kalidasa, who was a great Sanskrit poet and playwright, was one of them, and he wrote 3 works, which were Meghaduta, Kumara Sambhava, and Abhinana Shakuntala. They promoted trade, art, and architecture during this time. The administration. The empire was governed by a council of ministers called Mantri Parishad. It was divided into provinces called Bhuktis, and the governor of each province was called an Upparikas, and he was assisted by a Kumara Matya. The provinces were further divided into districts called Vishayas, and that was under the Vishayapatis. The districts were further divided into villages, and each village was headed by a village headman. That was the administration. the life of the people. They were mostly practicing agriculture. The women, they were pretty low down in the society, and they couldn't participate in any events, social or political. They did not have any education, and they did not have any property rights. They could not inherit property except for jewelry given at the time of the wedding, and this was called stri dhan. Stri means woman, dhan means donation. Sati was practiced, and that was a culture in which if the husband died, the woman had to jump into his pyre and kill herself. There was a rigid caste system, and there were untouchables during this time called chandalas, and they had to stay outside the city. Religion. Vishnu and Shiva were the main gods worshipped. The idea of avatar or incarnation of Vishnu was formed during this period. Dashavatara means 10 avatars of Vishnu, and that became popular during this time. They say that the 10th avatar is yet to come about. His name is Kalki. Buddha is supposed to be the 9th avatar of Vishnu. Idol worship became popular. There were temples built with idols. Religious worship became very complex and costly, and therefore the poorer people would become bhaktis, or they would do personal devotion at home. Dharma Shastras, which contained the Hindu social and religious rules, was compiled during this time. Trade. Roads and rivers connected the cities, and this promoted trade. The industries were weaving, carpentry, metallurgy, shipbuilding, and pot making. Rulers encouraged foreign trade. Spices, pearls, ivory, precious stones, perfumes, and textiles were exported. The ports on the west coast were Broch, Sopara, Kalyan, Calicut, and Cochin. They traded with West Asia and Africa and in the Mediterranean lands. The ports on the east coast were Tamralipti, which traded with Southeast Asia, and this led to the spread of the Sanskrit language, Indian art forms, and religions like Hinduism and Buddhism to Southeast Asia. Trade declined when the Huns invaded. Literature. Kalidasa wrote Meghaduta, Kumarasambhava, and Abhijana Shakuntala. The last one was performed in Europe with translation. Shudraka wrote a play called Mricha Katika, and Vishakadatta wrote Mudra Rakshasa, not Midra, Mudra Rakshasa. Panchatantra, which was a collection of fables, was also written during this time. It's available on Amazon if you want to buy it. Puranas, Ramayana, and Mahabharata were written during this time. Earlier, it was just passed on orally. Science. The most famous scientist of our Indian background is Aryabhatta. He was a mathematician and an astronomer, and he said the earth rotates on its own axis and revolves around the sun. He gave the concept of zero, and he introduced the decimal system. Varaha Mihira was another mathematician and astronomer, and he wrote Brihat Samhita, which was actually an encyclopedia of all branches of knowledge. Metallurgy improved because the iron pillar at Mehrauli in Delhi was cast, and this has not rusted yet. That is its peculiarity. Ayurveda and medicine reached new heights. Art and architecture. The Sarnath school of art excelled in sculpture making. Temples became models for future temples. A temple had a small central room called Garbhagriha, where the idol was placed. There were carved pillars supporting a low roof. The famous temples constructed during this time were at Deoghar, Sanchi, and Bhitargaon. Most cave temples of Ajanta with murals on the walls depicting Buddha's life were made during this time. This Gupta age is called the Golden Age of Indian history because of 1. Peace and stability. The Guptas freed the country from the Shaka menace and brought peace to the area. 2. Trade. The merchants performed overseas trade to China, West Asia and Southeast Asia, and also internal trade because many coins were found. Literature. Sanskrit plays by Kalidas, epics and dharma shastras were compiled during this time. It's not compiled, it's compiled. Science. The science of Ayurveda, Aryabhatta's concept of zero, the iron pillar all bear testimony to the greatness of science and technology. Religion. The foundations of Hindu temple architecture were laid, and worship of Vishnu and the concept of avatars became popular. Art and sculpture flourished during this time. The differences between Mauryan Empire and Gupta Empire. Religion. Mauryan Empire was mainly Buddhism. There was no idol worship. Dhamma was introduced and Buddhist stupas were built. But in the Gupta Empire, it was mainly Hinduism, worship of Shiva and Vishnu, widespread idol worship, the concept of avatars, and Hindu temples were built. Social divisions. This was based on professions, and there was no untouchability in the Mauryan Empire. But in the Gupta Empire, it was based on the caste system, and Chandalas were untouchables who were to live outside the city. The women. In the Mauryan Empire, there was no mention of any Stridan or Sati, but in the Gupta Empire, there was Stridan at marriage, and Sati was performed. Governors and administration. Supervision was by governors, local level officers in the Mauryan Empire, and the Gupta Empire, provincial governors were given independence, and local administration was run by local representatives. Salaries of the officials were mainly cash in the Mauryan Empire, mainly land grants in the Gupta Empire.